Before we get to today's guest, I just want to let you all know that CityWorks Expo 2017 is coming up October 5th through 7th in Roanoke, Virginia. We're really excited about the group of speakers we put together for this year, and we've got a number of exciting activities and additional resources we're looking forward to bringing to the table as well. So I hope you'll take a look at our website, cityworksexpo.com, or check us out on Facebook. And just take a look, maybe get yourself a ticket. We'd love to have you guys down to Roanoke. Or check out the fellowship program, which includes a free ticket, but also has access to a number of resources and mentorship opportunities that we're putting together. So thank you all for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoy it today. And please do give us a rating and review in iTunes or wherever you're listening to this. And reach out if you have any questions. Hope to see you come October. But in the meantime, have a great day.
Please listen carefully.
Welcome to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast from CityWorks Expo. My name is Brad Stevens, and I'll be your host today. It's my absolute pleasure to introduce you to our guest, Ms. Kirsten Wyatt, the Executive Director of ELGL. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Of course, it's my absolute pleasure, and it's nice to have someone from the West Coast. I don't know that we've had anybody from the West Coast on here so far.
Good. So it's a coast-to-coast podcast now.
That's right. So you're just in the middle of your day, and I'm trying to figure out how to make it through the last few hours of mine.
It's gorgeous out here in Portland. This is the time of the year to be in Oregon. If you talk to me in February, I might be a little bit more depressed and gloomy with the weather that we have.
Well, I have to share that a whole lot of us here in Roanoke are much more familiar with the geography of Oregon these days, with the incoming Deschutes brewery that we are beyond excited about.
Well, and I read about the cool, are they like pop-up bars that you're having this summer with Deschutes around Roanoke? That sounds like a really fun way to introduce the product to your community.
It's a pretty cool event. They do it in a couple other communities, but I think we take great pride that we had the biggest attendance last year. But who knows what'll come with that. But now, can you kind of walk us through some of what ELGL is and how you guys kind of got started and what you think the role of the organization is?
Sure. So ELGL stands for the Engaging Local Government Leaders Network. And we describe ourselves as being a big tent local government organization that is open to anyone who has a passion for public service. And the reason that concept is important to us is because about 6 years ago, when my husband Kent and I founded the group, we really felt like the ability to network and engage with local government peers was siloed based on your job title. It seemed that if you were in management, you hung out with the city managers, and if you were in finance, you hung out with the finance officers. But what we realized is there's not one clear path to leadership anymore. And so finding a way to network and share and engage with everyone who cares deeply about local public service was something that wasn't available. And so we wanted to create an organization that did just that.
And so you guys have how many members at this point?
So now we have about 2,400 members, and we are in 48 states. But when we started the group 6 years ago, we really thought it might just be an Oregon thing, and more specifically kind of a Portland metro thing. And our first meeting that we had 16 people there, and we had a luncheon. And again, under this idea that government is stronger and better if we share ideas. And sometimes we get good ideas from people who don't have the same job title that we do. And so we started by having these kind of meetup lunches, and then that effort grew into coordinating more speakers and programming at those lunches. And then from there, we started using social media to connect with each other. And that really was what kind of had us take off and become more than just an Oregon thing. We started getting more members to join the conversation from other states, people who just really wanted that forum to discuss local government without any sort of barrier based on job title.
That's really interesting. I usually try very hard not to give a pitch in the middle of these conversations for CityWorks, but I think that resonates a lot with us because one of the things that we focus on is that we want all those different people in the same room and to hear about different things so that it's not just one thing. I think that's why I find this so compelling, and I think that's for me. That's a really we're coming to a world where those barriers mean less and less. Those titles are in some places more and more important, but the distinctions are more and more harmful, I think, in some ways.
Yeah, I completely agree. And, I think about it in the terms of if someone's starting out and they are like a finance analyst, it doesn't do them any good to just learn about finance concepts, and that's the entirety of their exposure. For them to be learning about economic development, land use, and even just bigger picture HR and management concepts is going to make them a better employee, even if they really do stay in finance for the rest of their career. And so for us, it's really important that we make all of those options available. And then we also really like to highlight different career paths that people have taken or different jobs in local government. Because I think we all have had that experience where you get kind of pushed in one direction, and if you don't have someone kind of opening your eyes to these other ideas, you might not even realize that that's a career path that you could take and be really successful in. We're actually doing a series right now on the tremendous value that a city clerk or a city recorder brings to an agency, and that it's not just a secretarial position, it really is a policy coordination job. And to me, those things are important because I think sometimes you can just miss out on the very multifaceted careers that you could have at the local level.
Well, I think that part of what you guys do that's so compelling is just to make all careers of public service, those in local government, to seem more like an option to a lot of people. That I think that there's a lot of people that don't even consider that, and you guys are really showing the importance, but also the fun nature that these things can take on a lot of times.
And that's something I'm really passionate about. I feel like for a long time, you had to have, someone in your family or, perhaps a professor that pushed you in the direction of local government. And if you weren't around that sort of influence, there was a strong chance that you would never consider a career in public service. And I think in this day and age, with the availability to use social media and creative communications, we're able to tell a story about how incredibly rewarding a public service career can be. And again, how almost any job that you could work in the private sector, you can do in the public sector and, positively impact your community or the world around you every single day. And so telling that story is, kind of a really important foundation for everything that we do.
Well, so what's your kind of background? What kind of got you interested in these kinds of topics?
So I was a political science major at Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. And at that point in time was really only exposed to the typical political science teachings, which are very theoretical and then focus mainly at the state and federal level. And so I graduated from Willamette not knowing what a city manager was. I mean, just to be perfectly honest. And I went to work for a political consulting firm, really thinking that maybe I wanted to do like lobbying or political advocacy. And while working for that firm, I started doing work with some of our clients working at the local level. So started to get exposed to the work of city councils and city administration. And it just was this absolute eye-opening experience for me to realize how hands-on and critical local services are. Working on things like homelessness, but then also thinking on things like, how does clean water get delivered every single day to your tap when you turn it on? I mean, those really basic, fundamental functions of government that I think often when you're in an undergraduate political science department, you don't think about, but yet are so essential to public administration. And so I decided to go back to graduate school to become a city manager. And so I went to the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And it was kind of like, it was like my dream scenario. It was a small cohort of people who all care very deeply about local government public service. And the UNC School of Government is, the go-to resource in North Carolina for local government management. And so I really felt like at that point that I had found my place and, really focused my studies for those 2 years, on becoming a city manager. And during that time, I met my husband. He and I were working on a student project. We were creating a evaluation tool for extraterritorial sewer line extensions in Catawba County. And we had to develop the analysis tool to decide when the county should extend sewer services to new development. So it was, very romantic, but it was really, again, a chance to be part of a cohort that was working together, and I loved it. And so after we graduated, we moved to Richmond, Virginia, and we both worked for the state. We weren't able to find local government jobs. So I was working for the State Department of Education and Finance. My husband was working for the General Assembly for their Legislative Review Commission. And we did that for about 4 years. And it was fine. It was good experience. We both learned a lot about public sector agencies, especially large agencies, but that kind of deep, gnawing need to work at the local level was still there for both of us. And so after we had gotten married, we made that kind of pledge that couples do where we said, the first person to find a job will move there. And so I got the job here. I got a job here in West Linn, the city of West Linn, Oregon. And we moved out here, not knowing anyone. And I settled into my job. And then shortly after that, he got a job with the city of Tigard, Oregon. And then we were there for about 10 years. And it was during that time we decided to start this organization that really mimicked some of those concepts of connectedness and a cohort environment. I think that was a lot of the inspiration, from our UNC days that we mimicked when we created ELGL.
That's really interesting because I think one of the trends that, these people that work in communities recognize is that you need to have people come together in order to create change. And so it's interesting to see you guys take that kind of to another scale where and say, hey, people that are in local government need to get together and share ideas, not just those in the community. This kind of narrative expands beyond just what we kind of think of as community development.
Absolutely. And, because we always joke that not everyone is lucky enough to be married to a local government bureaucrat. And so we found tremendous value in the fact that, when we were both working for cities, if I was looking for a new, cable franchise agreement template, I could just ask him over dinner, oh, hey, have you guys done this recently? Can you send me what you have? But, that sort of information sharing, isn't innate in everyone's lives. And so for us to create a network where that's a really easy thing to do was important. And, another thing we always say is that, government is really the original open source network, right? Everything we do is shareable. And if we're truly the transparent organizations that everyone wants to be, everything you create should be something that you could send along to someone else when they're looking for it. And then again, in this day and age of social media, making that ask is even easier than ever before. And then being able to share a document, whether you're in a local government in Virginia or in Oregon, is something that's entirely possible.
So really, it's not just about the connections. It's also about a shared wealth of information that people can all pull from.
Absolutely.
Well, I kind of want to take a step back here and ask this kind of big overarching question, which is, you guys kind of shared some in your narrative about why local government was so important to you. Why do you think, how do you interpret that when someone asks you, you've devoted your entire life to this, why should someone else devote their life to this?
For me, it's all in the directness of service and how close to the citizens you are when you're working at the local level. And for me, especially as, when I was a student or when I was younger, that meant so much to me to be able to see the direct impact that local government has versus when I was working at the state level and, dealing with budgets, that were in the billions of dollars, but never really knowing how that money got spent or, being able to see the direct impact of that. Versus working at the local level where you sit in a staff meeting with people as varied as a librarian to a cop, and you're all on the same team, and you're all doing the same thing, but in different ways to make a community stronger. I just have always loved how multifaceted government is, local government is, And again, the ability to work with all different kinds of people, and then to see the results of that work, I mean, almost instantly. And then at the end of the day, too, the services that local government provides are so critical to public health and safety. And I don't think you can truly understand, the contribution that you're making at the local level until you start to think, bigger about, what clean water, what a sewer system means, what timely police and fire response feels like. And in many parts of the world, that's not a reality. And I think when you work at the local level, you're providing that every single day, and it makes the experience extremely rewarding. And that's why I'm always pushing people to kind of get your hands dirty. Don't be too removed from the important work of government if you're, working at a higher up level. Local government isn't the most glamorous. We don't have inauguration balls or lobbyists courting local government officials. But at the end of the day, that you've made your community stronger, and that's a really good feeling.
Well, that's a pretty compelling pitch there. I might have to reconsider my career options at this point. Well, I do wonder. So, at some point, I was convinced to join one of the local government boards here in town. So I'm on the Human Services Advisory Board for the city of Roanoke, and I think that that's a big push that we've been making now is to get those things full. And I think that for me has really shown some of the value here that we don't. When you see these commissions and the work that's being done there, and then the work that the leaders of those that are the bureaucrats and for which I don't know if you like to be called a bureaucrat or if that's an insult in some way, but to see the incredible work that's being done, it's both humbling to be able to be a part of it, but also really empowering to know that really these positions are open and you don't have to be an employee necessarily to make a difference in some ways.
Well, I think that's a great point, and I'm impressed that you're serving in that capacity because it can take a chunk of time. But we also find ourselves here at ELGL reminding our members that a great way to expand your knowledge base into an area that you currently don't have a lot of exposure in is to volunteer in your local government. And as an example, we have some members who really want more experience in the finance world, and so we've pushed them to join their local government's budget committee, for example. It's a great way to build your knowledge base. And I don't think that that's true just for government. I mean, I think for any of your listeners who, are trying to build their resume, a local government provides a wide array of services with a citizen involvement component. And so volunteering for those jobs can give you invaluable experience. And then specifically for our members, it's just been a way for us to encourage them to augment their understanding and learning by serving on one of those groups. So good for you for doing that.
Well, I got asked, so I did it. That's the way it normally works, isn't it?
That's right.
Well, kind of, it's. I'm going to throw a theory out to you, and I want to kind of hear your thoughts on it. And this is a theory I'm stealing from my graduate school advisor, who gives a presentation he designs to inflame passions and make people a little frustrated. But he claims that he thinks by the year 2050 that the only forms of real legislation and real governance will happen either at a corporate structure or at a local level. Does that resonate with you? Does this idea that local government is becoming more and more important in tackling the issues of the day resonate for you?
It does. And one of the things that I think is important to talk about in that conversation is how the traditional council manager form of government structure has helped as our world becomes more polarized politically. And I think that this obviously isn't true in every community because obviously not everyone has the council manager form of government. But I think that we've seen that consistency of service and of professionalism that you get when you have a professional administrator carrying out the day-to-day operations of your city, and allows politics to be handled at that policymaker elected official level, that has provided a degree of stability and professionalism that I think sometimes when you have highly political people making day-to-day decisions about operations, where that can get really sticky really fast. And so ELGL is definitely not an organization only for people working in council manager forms of government. We definitely have a lot of members who work in larger cities with strong mayors or commission forms. But we do find that many of our members are working at a level where that degree of professional management really matters, regardless of what department they're in. That level of stability and consistency that comes with a paid bureaucracy that manages the day-to-day operations.
Now, on the flip side, there's obviously a number of people that I'm sure you hear from that want to talk about how every decision should be as democratic as possible, and we need to put these decisions in the hands of the public at all times. So I wonder kind of how you navigate that discussion of when is a time for a bureaucrat or administrator, and when is a time for a democratic practice to be in play.
I think that's a great question, and I think a lot of it comes down to that politics administration dichotomy, which I'm sure you've talked about in school and many of your listeners have heard about. It's kind of that somewhat fuzzy line between the politics of a situation versus how do you carry out the implementation of that policy in a way that is consistent, transparent, and aligned with best management practices. And so, I think for me, what it comes down to is the fact that often the people working at the local level are highly skilled, highly trained, have experience in, whatever their area of expertise is, whether it's running the children's summer reading program at the library to, managing your swing shift in the police department to implementing your capital improvement plan in your finance department. A reminder that these are not people who are working in government like on a lark or because they can't do something better, that local government is a career choice that people have studied and trained and worked really hard at. And so I definitely agree that policymakers should be, telling the ship the direction it should go, but that the professional staff should be steering the boat to get it there.
Well, I think on the flip side of that, there's this interesting question too, in that when is it the appropriate time for the government to step in, and when is it a more appropriate time for a non-governmental actor to step into that void? And I wonder, that's some of the same questions, I think, in that realm, is it not?
It is, and we've actually started having some interesting discussions, especially as our organization has started doing more talking and thinking about how do cities deal with homelessness, and what are the best agencies or groups to affect change in that very important topic that seems to be getting worse, nationwide. And so we've had some good discussions about, what are the right types of organizations or the right types of systems to address, really big, complex issues like that. And I think, the only thing that everyone can agree on is that it's a really tough thing to discern. And if it is a political decision versus a administrative decision versus a nonprofit approach or even a religious approach to deal with some of those really complex issues.
But it sounds like it's clear that there's many tools and we need to figure out how those tools work together in some ways.
Right. And the other thing that we are very passionate about is that every single member of our organization is the same. So it doesn't matter if you work for a civic technology company that is designing software that makes government more efficient, or if you are the person working in local government who would use that software. We're all part of this together, and that we're not going to find the best solutions or the most efficient solutions if we don't all, join in this effort together. We might have different ways or different employers who are paying our paycheck, but at the end of the day, if someone wants to join our organization and think big and bold about, some of the more complex things that are out there, it doesn't matter if you work for a nonprofit or a private company or for a local government, you have a seat at the table and you have a part in that conversation. And to me, that's important because I think for a long time, again, it's similar to that idea of being siloed based on job title. We've always had this kind of us versus them mentality. And I think what you're seeing in a lot of bigger cities especially is that it requires some private sector investment or participation to really get government to be the best version that it can be. And, great examples of that would be like all of the work that the Bloomberg initiatives are doing nationwide to try to help cities become more innovative and more strategic. Great examples of how if we were to say, nope, we have this, just let public employees do it, we'd be missing out on a lot of expertise and opportunity that's out there.
We'd like to take a moment now to say thank you to our sponsors today. The Urban Affairs and Planning program at Virginia Tech School of Public and International Affairs offers an interdisciplinary approach to understanding planning and policy for megaregions, cities, suburbs, and rural regions in the U.S. and abroad. UAP faculty have expertise in urban planning, architecture, urban design, economics, geography, political science, law, technology, and engineering, and provide students with a multifaceted understanding of how communities grow and change. Students apply their knowledge and professional skills by participating in real-world problem-solving with community clients through project-based studios and applied research. UAP emphasizes technical analysis and policy evaluation in approaching the complexities of modern communities. So big thanks today to the Urban Affairs and Planning program down at Virginia Tech for being our sponsor. If you'd like to hear more, check them out online. But without further ado, we'll get back to today's guests. Thank you. Well, this kind of feeds naturally into one of the questions I had for you, which is kind of how, Virginia's a Dillon's rule state. It's kind of Roanoke itself is a somewhat progressive place, but it's in a very conservative climate. And, these questions of how do we spark innovation, I think, are very key to not just Roanoke, but a lot of communities like ours in the South and in the Midwest and all over the country. And so I wonder kind of how do we go about, or even what is the role of local government in being innovative and being forward-looking and trying to tackle these questions?
Well, there are a couple of parts to this answer. The first thing that I am seeing that I think is critically important is that real understanding that the data that local government has needs to be used as we think about how to find solutions to complex public problems. And so the first step I see some really innovative or forward-thinking local governments taking is that recognition that having some type of position in your agency, and it can often just be within a budget office, of someone who really is doing that analysis on both performance and financial data is a really important first step to understand what are all of the little parts that add up to make the whole of challenging community issues. And so the first step in that, I think, is having that recognition. There are groups out there, I mentioned before, the What Works City initiative through the Bloomberg Philanthropies program. They're doing great things to help local governments kind of advance that topic more aggressively. But even at the smaller organization level, the cities and counties that I see that are doing some really cool things have a real understanding of the metrics related to how they do business. The other thing that I think you can't pass by or not mention is just the simple fact that there are some leaders who are just more dynamic than others when it comes to motivating and inspiring a local government workforce. And so I have seen a real shift in the people pursuing management careers, to be a city manager or an assistant city manager. And I'm seeing a lot of people who embrace communications and embrace technology, stepping up into that role. I think for a long time, the city manager job was sometimes occupied by people with a background in finance or engineering. And it's not to say that those backgrounds still aren't critically important, but I think as our world becomes more, connected and communicative, having someone in those roles, those top leadership roles, who know how to tell a story and talk like a human and inspire people to action, those are becoming critically important skills that for a long time I think we relegated to like a PIO's office. And so I'm seeing a lot of our members who maybe started off thinking, I'll be a communications director someday, now really starting to think to themselves, you know what, I'm going to be a city manager and I'm going to be amazing at it, because in this day and age, if we're truly going to be innovative and inventive and creative and transparent, the skills that I have are what's going to make that happen. And so what I see happening in forward-thinking organizations is kind of this weird, like, opposite ends of the spectrum shift toward, on one hand, focusing on data and metrics, but on the other, embracing communications and information sharing. And it's when an organization is doing both of those really well that you see them able to take on these large-scale initiatives to make big changes and to do cool things.
That's fascinating because it goes back to some of the themes that I think are recurrent for anybody that works in community development, specifically communication and transparency being absolutely crucial. And I think that a lot of problems with local government in the past have dealt with the lack of transparency or a lack of clear definition of what goals are. And I think that it really speaks to me that's what the next generation has to bring to the table of leadership, is this transparency and willingness to talk and to listen both.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, even if you think about, something like a building department or building and zoning department, the ability for, not just the manager, but that department director to be able to reliably extract data on, the number of permits pulled that month, that tells a story then about the type of development that's occurring in your community. I mean, that's critically important. And if you can't, one, get that data, but then two, tell that story, it's going to be more likely that people don't trust what you're doing. But when you can do both of those things and you can do them well, people start to understand kind of this interplay between, the work we do at the, most basic, planning level, all the way up through, economic development and community impact. It becomes much more tangible and understandable. And sometimes I think in some of our fields, that communications brain and that analytic brain, they don't always happen in the same person. And so putting together teams where you can kind of harness all of those skills and make it happen, I think is really important.
Well, I think you touched on one of the crucial things there in the form of trust. Is what communication is what builds that trust. And I don't know what the history so much of the West Coast is with this, but I'm sure at Chapel Hill you talked about urban renewal and kind of the trauma that caused in many communities. And there's still places, Roanoke concluded, that trust is a really hard thing to come by in certain communities when it comes to local governments. I wonder if you could speak to kind of how officials and bureaucrats, but also anyone in local government, can kind of bridge that gap or try and repair that trust barrier.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, and I do think Oregon out here, it's somewhat unique in that we have some very restrictive land use laws in terms of how property can be developed, with the first and foremost priority being on protecting forest and farmland. And actually, goal 1 in the state of Oregon for land use planning is citizen involvement. And so I think it's a case of, this state out west learning from the experiences that happened, in the eastern part of the country. But an issue we think and talk a lot about is online engagement. How do we get people engaged in local government decision making using forums and tools that don't require you to attend a 7 p.m. meeting at a city hall on a weeknight? This idea that not everyone has a schedule or an interest, frankly, in participating in that forum, but yet it's still important to hear those voices. And then we've also been thinking a lot lately and counterbalancing that with this concept of digital equity. How is it that we also talk about this idea that not everyone has the same technology available to them, or the same understanding of how government uses that feedback, and making sure that you don't lean too heavily on one tool or another, but instead really look at this toolbox approach to try to get community input, especially into land use decision making. And that's where I think the job has become more difficult because of technology. There are so many more ways that you can collect information, but I do see some local governments throwing up their hands and saying, all right, we're sticking to public hearings at 7 p.m. on a Wednesday, and if you can't be there, you obviously don't care. But I don't think that's the right approach either. So what we continue to think and talk about is, how do you counterbalance this idea of this wide open forum now to share thoughts and opinions with the fact that not everybody still might have access to those tools or those operating systems it requires to run those tools, or whatever that barrier might be. And so, what we continue to talk about is, it's not just a one-time thing. that it's not a one-time forum that you open up, when you have a big development going in, that you create a culture of trust and transparency and openness over time. And so there's a lot of different venues and forums that people know that they can go to get reliable, accurate information.
And of course, on the flip side, that they can give that information all they want, but if they don't feel like it's being heard, I think that creates this whole other issue. And so I think one of the underestimated things that I think local government leaders that are effective bring to the table is often humility. This kind of, I don't know the answers. I want to hear what your answers are, and let's work together. Is that something you have found?
Definitely. And I think that's, again, where that storytelling piece comes into play. The ability to say, I went to this public hearing last night, or I got all the comments in from this online forum, and here's what I heard. And it may not, and what you heard may not be what the ultimate decision is, but you're going to hear, threads of that in the ultimate decision, hopefully that's reached. And I think that's where, again, it's not a one-time thing. It's not a checkbox on a list for, a planner to complete. It really needs to be an integrated effort across an agency, as you're looking at how you engage the community and then continue to tell those stories. And I think, too, like you said, it's kind of that empathy of, I heard this sentiment being talked about a lot during this, particular application. How do I then turn around and articulate back, to the other departments in my city, this is a real topic that's affecting a community, and what do we do about it proactively? That concept of listening and hearing beyond your current project, I think, is really important, and something that we talk about again when we think about this being a long-term effort and not just a check the box. We did our communication and now we're done kind of effort.
Interesting. Do you think that training has changed for local government officials? That doesn't seem like something that I feel like is a traditional trait of local government, but it does seem to be something that's becoming more prevalent. Is that something that you think goes back to education or training, or where would you say that comes from?
I think that's one of the things that really has helped ELGL and our organization find success, because I think you're right. I think, and I've never been in like a Masters of Urban Planning program or anything like that, but it's not my sense that they have like a heavy, a weighted learning track on communications and engagement, or maybe they do. But same thing, like if you train to become a engineer and you're working for a city, I mean, the likelihood that you've had extensive training in community engagement, it probably isn't there. And so I think, again, for us, training across disciplines and making sure that the information that we talk about is based in, people in the field telling their experiences. It's a way for people to continue that education. I always remain, consistently surprised by how, in some professional education or discipline programs, there isn't some of that cross-training on budget, on communications, on HR and management. And I know that there's only, however many courses you could take in your 2-year program, but I mean, those are all critical functions to become a department director in a local government department. And so, I like to think that we provide, some of those perspectives, every day on our blog or, through our webinar series. Because I think, again, it's important if you're going to become a really well-rounded local government professional.
Well, I'm wondering, too, that even if you kind of follow all of the best practices, you listen and you're really humble and you think through things and you engage in this lengthy dialogue process, there's still likely that you're going to make some decisions that make a certain portion of the population unhappy. So kind of how do you deal with that, knowing that, I've done everything I could, but there's still people angry with me?
I think that's a critical part of the job that we need to be aware of and recognize and be there to support each other in. If people get into local government because they think it's going to be easy and that there's a lot of black and whites, then that's something we need to pretty quickly correct them on and, set them in the right direction about how do you create the network for yourself. So when someone's, being horrible to you in a public meeting, you know how to stay composed, and you know the network to go to get some affirmation or support after that meeting. And I think also too, I mean, again, it comes back to me of telling these true local government stories about here are challenges that this city faced when they were putting in a new 300 home subdivision. What were some of the challenges? What were some of the wins? But at the end of the day, I think, again, it comes back to that more intangible part of what we try to create through our network, which is a true network of support and of friendship and of camaraderie that I think you just need as you face a career that where you're facing or you're dealing with issues that don't have easy answers. And there's some quote that's out there, and it's about if public problems or true public goods, if it was easy, then private sector would do it. But the reason that it gets left up to government is because these are hard, challenging issues that don't turn a profit, and so it's left up to people who have to sometimes put your head down and soldier on. And if we can create a network of support and friendship, to help you through those times, I think that's really important.
Well, I'm intrigued kind of how you guys have built this large network now. How have you kind of found that people that come from different communities communicate with one another? Because, I mean, I mentioned Virginia being a Dillon's rule state. I imagine it's very different to talk to someone in a free rule state about what their local government is like, or if there's someone that's coming from a small municipality versus a large municipality, how those things differ. How have you guys kind of managed to bridge the gap between all those different differences?
Again, I think social media is really the thing that has made us so successful. Our ability to use all of these different platforms to start conversations and share information. For example, even today, we had a city manager of a very wealthy Seattle suburb post a comment on our private Facebook group saying, how do we get the word accountability to not be negative to our employees? And what are some phrases that your local government uses that mean the same thing, but that maybe you don't have that same loaded feeling? And right now we have, I think, 10 different people weighing in this conversation, and they're from organizations as large as, state association, municipal associations, to management analysts in small cities, thousands of miles away. And those are the types of things where, she's not asking, the city manager isn't asking for, the plans for a water system upgrade to pump station 5. She's asking for, how do we create a workplace culture and local government? And I'm running into this barrier, and how can you help me? It's not to say that, those water system plans couldn't be made available if someone asked for them. But I think that these types of questions are where this network continually comes together across organization type, size of the organization, or even, the form of government, to help each other make better decisions, and then also just learn about, different topics. Again, in this case, she's a city manager. She's thinking big picture about management. But I love the fact that someone who is maybe an MPA student or, someone working in their first local government job recognizes that, wow, a local government manager in this very high profile position is being thoughtful in her word choice as she tries to motivate, a large organization in doing good work. And to me, that's powerful. And it wouldn't happen if we didn't have things, like Twitter, like Facebook, to engage those people in.
Well, I think that this speaks to something that you guys do really well, which is that not only are you engaged with these important issues, but you make it fun, which I think is crucial to what you guys do, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, one of our kind of unofficial mottos is, government has to be pretty prescribed and boring, but that doesn't mean your professional network has to be. And there's, plenty of reasons to, make fun of ourselves or to make fun of the profession. That's not disrespectful. And if anything, it just, lightens up pretty serious work. And so for us, that's important. And I think the other thing that's kind of along those lines is this idea that we try really hard to not talk in management speak. we always want stories instead of direction. Like, we don't want an article on our blog that just kind of yammers on about best practices in management. We want to hear a story about a challenge and then how you solved it. And those same principles of management may be true in that story, but we want that storytelling to be a cornerstone of how people learn, because I think that's what makes it so relatable. And so, yeah, that idea that we do things that are fun and engaging and interesting, I think draws people in, and then it makes them listen to the more serious stuff that's also contained in some of that material that we produce.
Well, now, how long have you guys been doing this with ELGL?
So it's been about 6 years, and I just took over doing it full-time. So I was the assistant city manager here in West Lynn up until about a year ago. And so I've been running ELGL full-time as the executive director.
Well, that's very exciting. I wonder if you could talk, just to share a couple of the biggest things you think you've learned along the way from either working in local government or kind of getting this organization started.
Sure. So I think we had one really powerful story a couple of years ago with one of our members who was a communications director for a medium-sized Chicago suburb. And she, it was one of those communities that was pretty demanding, like their residents, really expected a lot out of local government. So she had a lot of those, demanding phone calls for service and expectations and things like that. And her job was tough. And we got her involved with ELGL and introduced her to a network of people who were, also working in similar capacities, both near her so she could meet with them in person, but also just around the country in general, working in communications and engagement. And shortly after she'd really gotten involved with us, she had an offer from a private sector company to come and do communications for them. It was actually the people that make Slim Jims, like those beef sticks or whatever. And it was a lot of money. And it was, kind of single issue, like she was working on Slim Jims all day. And she often says that like 6 months prior, she may have taken that job. But after she found that she had this network built in that she could depend on when times got tough or when she didn't know the answer right away, she stayed in the public sector. And has since gone on and is now department director up for a large community up in Michigan. And to me, that's really powerful. It's a reminder that if you don't build a network for yourself, the tough times are even tougher than they need to be. And having that support network or that resource network is important. And just because you're in a certain type of community doesn't mean that you have to look for that exact same organization. You might find it in a place, that's halfway across the country, but that person is at the same point in their career or their experience, and our network can help you find that. So that's kind of one thing I've learned along the way that keeps me going and wants to make this organization, the strongest group that we can be. And I think the other aspects of what I've learned from running this group is how meaningful and powerful it is to have those personal connections with people, whether it's sending someone a handwritten note or recognizing their contributions or something that they've done in their job and asking them to tell their story to the ELGL network. It's just a reminder of how paying attention and being mindful of, the opportunities that people could share. I mean, it really can make a huge difference. And I think how that translates to a typical local government organization is, when you're a manager or when you're a mid-manager and that someone in your organization has talents or traits that would make your organization stronger, call them out and recognize them and celebrate them and find a way to incorporate it into the work that you do. Just because government has really prescribed job titles doesn't mean that we shouldn't get to know our employees and find out what makes them tick and what they're passionate about, because some of our best contributors to this organization have been sharing things that they are passionate about or that they learn about and they want other people to know about too. And then I think the last thing that I'm really passionate about, and again, mentioned it earlier in this conversation, is this idea that we're all in this together. It doesn't matter if you are on a citizen advisory board or if you are a business working, with local government, or if you're in local government, we're all in this together, and we're not going to solve those big, hairy problems unless we recognize that it's not an us versus them mentality. That a citizen who cares deeply about an issue and a vendor who provides the software to address that issue, and then the local government employee who is assigned to that issue, the more that they can come together and work together on topics, the more powerful that solution is going to be. And so for us, really opening, and creating this big tent has been a huge part of what drives us to run the organization in the way that we do.
It's there's just so much there. It's hard to. I just want to sit here and kind of ponder on that. But I suppose we're getting towards the end here, so I guess I'll kind of wrap us up by just asking if you, and you've already shared several compelling stories, but if you have a story that kind of encapsulates what you think it means when a community is working well, or when you see a place that you think is thriving.
Let me think.
I put you on the spot here. I apologize.
I know. No, that's fine. I think here's just, and this is just one very somewhat narrow example. There's a park district in Illinois, and they created a position called Chief Innovation Strategist for the park district. And they hired a woman. Her name is Bobby Nance. She has since left that job. She's now doing consulting. But what Bobby realized is that the ability to take the vast amount of data that a park district creates and use it to drive decision-making and purchasing has turned that park district into one of the most well-run organizations in the nation. And what Bobby realized is that if she was able to get her arms around not just kind of the revenue that came in from their summer recreation program, but also the number of kids that were in the programs and what neighborhoods they lived in and what programs they signed up for and which ones they didn't sign up for. All of this really helpful information that sometimes government collects but doesn't do much with it, that she could help that park district make the very best choices that met the needs of their community. And one of the last things that she worked on was this really cool kind of beta startup program with a company called SUFA, based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And it's a bench that is solar powered and also has a sensor in it that collects the number of cell phone pings within a certain range of that bench. And so Bobby was able to work on this startup partnership with a private company to create a system by which she could truly understand how many people were using a park facility at any given point in the day, to then understand the timing and the ways that she would deploy maintenance teams and programming and things like that. And so it's just one example of someone who not only has that vision, but then also that ability to take that information and tell a story about it, and then ultimately result in better decision-making and programming for her community, or in this case, the district. And things like that are just, it's exciting. It's this kind of hodgepodge of, old school management styles and, this new school data collection that I think makes local government so exciting. And people like Bobby and her willingness to open herself up and her agency up to new kinds of partnerships and learning, to me really is just one of those, great success stories of innovation and creativity.
Well, that's just a great story to end on, and it just goes to show, I think, that we're all learning how important data is, and if you're not on that train, you better get on it fast, because it's only going to get bigger, I think. But thank you so much for taking the time today, Kirsten. We really appreciate it. For those of you all listening, if you'd like to know more about Kirsten or ELGL, you can check them out at elgl.org. Is that right?
That's right. And we're also on Twitter at ELGL50 and on Facebook at ELGL Network.
Well, and I will share that they are one of the best Twitter follows that is in this world. So go ahead and check it out. I believe there's some reference to Chris Traeger and the wonderfulness of Parks and Rec fairly frequently, so we can all enjoy that. But again, thank you for the time, Kirsten. If you guys are interested in CityWorks Expo, you can find out about us at CityWorks Expo. That's cityworksexpo.com. And thank you so much.
Thank you. This was really fun, and I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to the Big Ideas for Better Places podcast today. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and leave a rating. It really helps other people find out about our fascinating guests and find the information that we have to share. Lastly, please save the date for our upcoming event, October 5th through 7th in Roanoke, Virginia, and keep up to date by following us on Facebook and checking out our website, cityworksexpo.com. That's cityworksexpo.com. Thank you guys again, and look forward to seeing you next week. Thank you.